Hey guys, welcome back to Pike Catching Care UK. This is part 2 of the video of where to find pike, and in this video we're going to be talking about where in the body of water itself that we can find pike once we've already identified the water to fish. So hopefully from the last video you picked up some tips in relation to looking at other people's pictures, other people's videos. You've managed to identify those areas on Google Maps using the satellite setting. However, even with that in mind, there might not be fish there at that given time. So it's also worthwhile being a bit open-minded about where you're going to be fishing. So you can also use Google Maps on the satellite setting for more useful things as well. If you have a look at the shade of the water, typically the lighter it is, you'll see it's lighter at the edges, you know, where it becomes a bank. You'll see that it's lighter there, and the reason for that is the light penetration. It's going to go through, you're going to see the bottom is going to be lighter. And as it gets deeper, as the water gets deeper, typically it gets darker. And the reason it can get dark is either that there's a drop off, and a drop off is simply if the underneath, if the floor of the body of water goes like this, and then suddenly, you know, there's a steep area where it drops off and becomes suddenly deeper. That's what we call a drop off. It's going to show up as being darker on Google Maps. It's going to be darker because the light's not able to penetrate. Another reason why it could be darker is that, you know, even something going like this, eventually it's going to run to a point where the light can't penetrate the water anymore, and then it's going to become dark from that point. So that's worth bearing in mind as well. And another reason that you can use Google Maps, or another feature of Google Maps, is you can see where there's areas or, you know, small rivers, whether it's a stream, whether there's going to be some sort of input into the body of water. And typically those are great because they bring in nutrients, they bring in fresh fish, they bring in food for the smaller fish, and those fish then in turn become the bait or the food for the pike. So I would always be looking at fishing in those areas. So if it's a mouth of a stream, for example, that's a great area where to start, especially if you're fishing on a loch or a lake. So those are just ideas that you can look at even before you've arrived on the lake or the loch. Okay, so you've arrived on the lake or the loch, wherever it is that you're fishing. You've done your research before, you've picked out an area, you've been fishing it for a while, it's not been very productive for you. And that's fine, because you have to remember that pike are animals. They're chasing after a food source. Perhaps those shoals of bait fish have moved on to another area. The fish aren't going to sit there and starve. They're going to move and try and find food. So with that in mind, you need to start looking for the telltale signs of bait fish shoals. And by that, what I mean is you can start having a look at things like, you know, you can see like a flickering on the surface. It looks like somebody's got a handful of rice and chucked a handful of rice onto the surface, and you can see just tiny little specks all over the place. That's a sign of a shoal of bait fish feeding on the surface. So other places you could be looking for then is you could be looking for places of cover. And by that, I mean things like vegetation. So it could be sunken weed beds, it could be reeds, it could be lily pads, any sort of vegetation which is grown within the body of water that's going to have structures underneath that the pike can hide in amongst. You can also be looking at things like fallen trees, logs, even depending on where you're fishing, sunken cars, anything that is going to provide cover. And the reason why is that you're 3 times less likely to be spotted in cover than you are if you're out in the open. And bearing in mind that pike are predator fish and they're ambush specialists, they're going to need to find those areas to hide in, and that way they're going to be expending less energy by coming out from a piece of cover. The fish don't know that they're there, they've come closer, and then the pike have come out and caught them. And that's how typically pike are feeding. And another place that you can find pike are, if you've had a look beforehand, you've managed to see where the drop-offs are, and the bigger fish are going to be found in those drop-offs areas. They're going to be found in what are effectively sometimes known as pools. So that is an area where perhaps it's maybe shallow roundabout and then there's a deeper area in there. And the reason why is, if you can imagine, if you're a pike, you're going to be underneath the water. It's going to be dark. If you're looking down into water, it's going to be darker than it is if you're underwater looking up. So when you're underwater looking up, you can see things passing overhead, you can see silhouettes of fish. And again, so rather than talking about pike ambushing from cover, they could be ambushing from underneath. So the pike are going to be lying on the bottom, there's going to be a bait fish swimming overhead, and the pike are going to come up and catch them. Okay, so just imagine that you've set up in an area. The next couple of things that you should be thinking about are pike biology, and you should be thinking about water temperature. So in terms of pike biology then, you need to remember that the pike have their eyes on top of their head. They're not like ours, they can't see directly below them. Although that's in our peripheral vision, you have to remember that pike have a jawline that runs underneath there, so that's going to be effectively a blockage almost that they can't see there. They can see to the sides and front and above perfectly fine, however they can't see directly below. So if you're fishing a lure that has really low vibration properties, there's a potential you're going to pass that pike by until you're much further in front of it, and by that point you might be at a point where you're about to lift that lure out of the water and it's going to be too late to catch that fish. So with that in mind then, you need to also remember that pike have what's called the lateral line. It's effectively their hearing system. It's sensors that run down the side of their body. They can detect vibration from that. So if you have something that has a bit of vibration property to it, so that it could even be something as simple as using a split ring to attach your trebles. Using a split ring and the treble, that motion of those two going through the water can create a very slight clinking sound. That's going to be enough to create a vibration property. Or it could be something like a spinner. That's going to be perfectly fine as well, because that's going to create lots of noise and lots of vibration. It's going to be something that the pike can pick up, and that's going to be something that even if you're fishing much further below the fish, they're going to be able to sense that, and it's going to potentially invoke a strike. So secondly then, you need to be thinking about the water temperature. So in terms of that then, if you can think of the water temperature as being much like a cocktail, it's going to have the different layers there, and that's going to represent the different water temperatures. In summer, getting into autumn, the top of the water is much warmer than the bottom of the water. And that's simply because that there's light and the sun is warming up the top part of the water. So that's just something to think about. Try out the different levels of the water column whilst you're fishing, and also just remember the pike biology. And that's two things you should be thinking about when you're fishing your spot. Okay, so we've discussed some of the methods you can use for finding pike within a body of water. It's not definitive, it's not the be-all and end-all list, however I think it's probably the most important points. We will go through other points in future videos, however this was just a quick guide just to give people an idea. I know it's the start of the pike season, I know people are really excited, and there's going to be a lot of beginners out there, so this is just to give people a starter, a little bit of an idea, and hopefully you find it useful.